Good afternoon and welcome to the Frank E. Merriweather Jr. Branch Library. This is the newest library in the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library System, and I feel very blessed and fortunate to be the first branch manager here. The community is also very blessed and fortunate because we do a number of programs at this library, and this one is very, very special. Because I'm a woman of a certain age, I remember the .22 caliber killer when this whole thing was happening in this area. And I'm very, very pleased to have Dr. Dobson here. I'm very pleased that he has written a book on the subject, and I hope you all take time to get a copy and to talk with him about his book. And at this time, I'd like to turn the program over, and once again, thank you for coming. And I just want to say, I don't want you to think I'm rude, but some of you know I'm a performing artist, and today I'm performing actually at 3:30, so I'm late. So when I take off, you know, it's not that I'm being rude, but this has been something in the works for over a year. And now I'm turning the program over. Thank you.
I think the first thing to do would be to just introduce ourselves, and maybe we can talk a little bit. I'm Frank Dobson, born and raised in Buffalo, educated in the Buffalo Public Schools, a proud graduate of the Buffalo Public Schools as well as UB, and I was blessed to be able to write this book, but I want to, before I do that, I want to let each one of us on the panel talk a little bit about ourselves, and then we can start with some questions and comments about this important subject, which I think ties to today. Matter of fact, I know ties to today. The brother and I were talking about the violence that is rampant in our streets today, whether it's in my hometown of Buffalo, New York, or my other hometowns of Dayton, Ohio, and Nashville, Tennessee. And so clearly the question of violence today, and particularly violence perpetrated against African-American people, in the case of the .22 caliber killer, by white pathological racists, but in the case of our community today, much of the time, it's perpetrated by ourselves. So I'd like to now turn it over to my brothers to my left, and they can each introduce themselves.
Thank you, Dr. Dobson. It's truly good to sit next to a son from our community who has made us so very proud. My name is Charlie H. Fisher III, and I am the former president of the BUILD organization. In fact, I was the 7th of 9 presidents, and I served as president of BUILD from 1977 to 1979, and then executive director 79 and 80. I was thrilled when I learned of the book and the significance. And today we're going to really explore the amazing reality of 30 years later, how little different it is in terms of the safety and well-being, not just of our whole community, but even very black men themselves. And so again, today I'm a former council member at large. I guess a lot of former things, but I am certainly the president of or chair of the Youth Planning Council and Community-Based Organization Forum today, and we do a few other things. So it's very much an honor, and I'm excited about this panel today.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim McLeod. I'm currently a judge in the City Court of Buffalo, and I'm glad to be here and looking forward to going back 30 years and talking about this incident, and perhaps in some instance giving information that might not have been known.
My name is Damone Smith, Madison District Council member, born and raised in the city of Buffalo. I was about 7 years old when the .22 caliber killer was out. I remember the conversations amongst the men, as well as my uncle Roger Adams was a victim of the .22 caliber killer. So I'm more very interested in the discussion.
Hi, my name is Frank Gist. I'm a columnist for the Buffalo Criterion News. A few years ago, I wrote a column, and I was asking the question, whatever happened to it? You heard of the Son of Sam, all these other serial killers, but you never heard of the .22 caliber killer. So when I read this book, when I heard of this book, I was eager to read it, and it was a fascinating book. And I'm very pleased to be on this panel.
I would be remiss if I didn't at this point thank Sherelle Kinley for all of her efforts in pulling this together, as well as Ms. Bush and the library, and all of you all for coming out. I'd like to start by just kind of talking a little bit about the book in terms of my own personal take on it and what compelled me to write the book. First of all, I'm a writer. It's my second novel, and I've written all kinds of other things in various genres, plays, etc. And I think I wrote the book precisely because of what my brother Frank down there said, that there wasn't that much attention to it. A few years ago, my sisters in front of me, our parents were both essentially fading away, dying. And you know, as someone who's living away from your parent and you're going back and forth to care for them, coming back to the city where you were raised, you start thinking about the city and about your own past. And it was so interesting living away from Buffalo, and nobody would talk about the .22 caliber killer. One summer, maybe about 2001 or something like that, I went to the Buffalo Public Library and started reading the old microfilm and microfiche about it. I was working at Vanderbilt University a few years later and went to the library and got every single book at Vanderbilt University on on serial killers. Every single book I could get out of our library. And so The Son of Sam was mentioned, Ted Bundy was mentioned, Jeffrey Dahmer was mentioned, but there was no mention of this. And according to some accounts, we're talking about as many as 13 victims. And I'm thinking, why is that? And so one of the things I wanted to answer was the question of why this hasn't received the kind of attention that the Atlanta child murders have received or any of the other ones have. And it was so interesting that, and I guess I'm going to pose this question first of all to the rest of the panel, that I was back here in February and I met Frank at the time, and I was at the University of Buffalo talking to a class of African American and other students. And one young lady in the front row asked me, she said, Dr. Dobson, why is it that this didn't receive the kind of attention that the Atlanta child murders did or some of the others? And then she asked me the second part of the question, which was, she said, was it because it was Buffalo or because the victims were black? And maybe I'll let y'all answer that.
You know, 31 years ago, Time magazine spent a week in the community, and it struck me, why would Time magazine spend 1 week in the city of Buffalo? Why would Reverend Jesse Jackson come and be in a rally with 800 of us at the old Bill Town Hall at 1420 Main Street, the old Channel 7 TV building? Some of you might have even been there for that occasion. What was the significance of it? And so I'd like to offer this, that 31 years ago, it did receive significant national exposure. Not just national exposure, but it riveted the community. But history and the recording of history, something happens in Buffalo. And I use one quick example. The founder of this city, the originator of Buffalo is Joseph Hodge. Why is it that Joseph Hodge, who came here in 1789, is not considered the father of Buffalo, New York? What is it about our history that becomes his story and not mine? So I'd like to offer that the difference of point A and B, Atlanta to Buffalo, was not in the fact that how we organized it differently, and it wasn't that we didn't have national coverage. It was the treatment of the historical significance of it and what we did collectively afterwards. Because in Atlanta, the child killings riveted the city like it riveted us here. But in fact, it was a little bit more removed, a little bit more clinical, because it happened in particular certain fringe communities. It didn't strike the fear that it struck in men in our community. So I think it's more the treatment of history and the ongoing organizing thereof. And yes, we did organize a Black Leadership Forum. We hosted the first meeting, but it's what we did thereafter that told the story for the rest of time.
Well, I think one of the other things that you have to recognize, at least as far as Joseph Christopher is concerned, as opposed to the other people that you referenced, he was never convicted as a serial killer. I mean, there is no conviction for that. He was convicted initially of only three homicides here in Buffalo. And those homicides convictions were overturned. So technically, There is no one, unlike in these other major cities that you're talking about, who was ever convicted as a serial killer. And perhaps if indeed that had been, and we're talking about a lot of people who were killed here, but again, realizing that there were only 3 that came to trial. And so the question that's begged is whether or not Joseph Christopher indeed was the person involved in all of those killings, let alone just the 3 that he was charged with. Those 3 that he was charged with, convicted of, but those convictions were vacated, so he's considered innocent of killing anybody here in Western New York. That's the legal part of it. And then 2, as you look at the history, and I look at the history from a perspective of like Charlie, who's a bit older than I, having been there when all of this happened. I got involved as a young lawyer back during that time because of the Buffalo Urban League and Leroy Coles and some of the meetings that started taking place there. And at that time, all of the leaders of the city of Buffalo joined together. And it was not only Joseph Christopher that was taking place during that time, but we also had the Nazis who were trying to come to Buffalo for the sake of doing marching here and rally that was had down at downtown at Lafayette Square and on Bailey Avenue. And so, as we go forward, again, when we talk about the killings, as I mentioned earlier, there's information that perhaps because some of these did not come to trial, that people aren't necessarily aware of, and so there's a difference. And let me just give you just a little taste of it, for example, because as a young lawyer and having been involved in the leadership forum, I was privy to be part of many meetings that took place with the then district attorney where information was brought to our attention in an effort to try to help keep the community calm. And based on information that was presented and information that was gathered and composites that were drawn as a result of people swearing to the description of the person involved in these killings, I can tell you Joseph Christopher was not the person whose composite was ever created for the person who was observed by many people, more than one person, having been involved in these shootings. And so, quite honestly, when he was arrested and seeing this little short, dumpy little guy, based on the information that had been presented to the leadership that had been gathered by the police, that had been gathered by eyewitnesses, I was shocked that he indeed was charged with these crimes. And so I, quite honestly, have very serious doubt as to all of these killings that we're talking about, that this book deals with, and we're talking about very serious series of killings that took place here in the city, but have serious doubt as to whether or not Joseph Christopher indeed was the person involved in all of them.
The question was posed, was it that this happened in Buffalo or was it that it was black? And I guess looking at it as a young man watching this go on, and now assuming a position in government where I have to figure out why is this neighborhood so dilapidated? Why is the parks and different structures in the conditions that they are? And they've been this way for 20, 30 years. I guess I would conclude that it's putting the two together, being black in Buffalo. And it hasn't been easy. The being black in Buffalo has a history of being ignored, pushed to the side, disenfranchised by community services. You had a mayor who actually got on TV, and when somebody asked him, why do you only snow plow one side of the city, he said, because those are the people that have jobs. And these were the people that were able to lead the area at a certain time. And then you look at the condition and investment and where the investment went and how a lot of investment didn't go on the east side for decades. And then you have a murder, because I remember these so clearly. I remember the fear in black men, seeing my father scared, seeing him and his friends scared, seeing black men actually arming themselves to walk to the store. And so to be put in that state of fear doesn't mean that you want to continually to visit that. And so if somebody wants to cover it up and wash it over, that's somewhere that people don't want to go back to, because that gripped the city. You had the guy cutting out hearts of cab drivers, people getting shot on corners. I mean, that was very serious thing that was going on at the time. And I remember the fear. That's the biggest thing I can remember, is just the fear in the community and the fear in men. And I'm talking about my father. He's a manly man, you know, and for him to be scared and watching my father be scared as a boy, it gives an environment where it can be covered over by those who may just want to pacify the community until this thing washes over.
I'm glad you brought up fear, because that's what I remember most about it, is being scared to go to the store, scared to go and go about our daily business. But it was another aspect that you touched on it in the book, is that there seemed to be a lack of concern, whether real or conceived, from the white community. I remember there were a lot of cases of white kids riding by in cars, flicking big lighters as scaring you, and there seemed to be a lack of concern, like, well, who's going to, is the police really out to catch this guy? And that's the most memorable thing about the whole episode to me, is that, and I remember my sister getting a phone call in the course of business, and some white woman made the comment, well, what's the big deal? Just black guys anyways getting killed. And I wouldn't believe that anybody would say that. And it was a very fearful time for any black man, or any black person at that time. Okay.
I want to pick up on the fear, and I want to introduce the whole question of genocide as well, which is something we in the black community used to talk about a lot, and we don't talk about as much anymore. The brother in the front row, I'm blanking on your name, sir. Paul and I were talking about youth that we deal with respectively, he here and I away from here, and how black youth don't seem to value their own bodies a lot. Like I'm mentoring a kid right now through Big Brothers Big Sisters who's 12 years old and already a part of the criminal justice system, in that he has a PO, he's been up for robbery, he's been kicked out of school, and when he and I talk, and both of his parents are also incarcerated right now, so he's being raised by his granny, one of the things he says to me is, I guess I'm gonna go to jail. And I'm thinking, you're 12 years old. What are you talking about? And we have a great relationship, but, I wonder when, like with one of the teachers, he's gonna cuss me out, or because I upset him or whatever. And so the whole question of genocide, I think today, which is different from this year, 1980, which the book kind of captures, because at that time, not only was there the Atlanta child murders going on, and the fact that in the book, and I talk about this, you had police people from Buffalo going down to Atlanta and sharing information. You had the authorities also going and visiting the son of Sam in prison to try to get into the mind of a serial killer. But you also had in May of 1980 an assassination attempt on the life of Vernon Jordan, who was then president of the Urban League. So there was this nationwide hysteria on the part of African Americans in terms of who was trying to kill us, whether it's Vernon Jordan, Atlanta, Buffalo. And so the whole question of genocide is one I want to kind of tackle a little bit, because we don't talk about it anymore. But when I look at the streets of Buffalo or the streets of Nashville, Tennessee, or the streets of other major urban centers, I see genocide happening in some kind of way. And so maybe there's another question I want to ask, but maybe I'll toss that one out and ask why we don't talk about that anymore, or is that even something that we should? I mean, it's almost like it's something we talked about back in the 70s when we were raising our hands and raising our fists. We talked about genocide. Why don't we talk about genocide anymore, or is that even something that we should?
I'm glad you raised that, Dr. Dobson. This is a document from the BUILD organization. Actually, it was its 13th annual Policies and Issues Committee report at the Buffalo Convention Center. And here's something that they said, because although this doesn't specifically speak to the genocide, here's a snapshot of the mindset of the community 30 years ago. Whereas President Carter has chosen to pardon Mrs. Patricia Hearst while choosing to ignore the fact that Reverend Benjamin Chavis remains incarcerated despite of his innocence, and whereas racist and political frameworks of this nature are becoming more a common means of squashing political dissent and further oppressing the poor, the BUILD organization fully supports and will actively pursue the total unconditional freedom Now, and they go on in this to address the injustice system. In fact, Kenny Johnson, who you may remember, Judge, was the Build Youth Vice President, and he had been arrested. It took him a number of years to finally get his freedom. Now he's a very successful businessman. But in that document, they address Gary Tyler, Dasajawiya, Asana Shakur, George Merritt, and Kenny Johnson. Now, with respect to the genocide, it was something that was often postured, and our Turner Robinson was Mary Robinson's son, Ernestine Robinson's brother, Mary Robinson's brother, Miss Bessie Robinson's son. Turner Robinson, he actually used the term often. He was chair of the State of Affairs Committee. And so it was used constantly. It was used regularly. And there was a concern about that. There was a sense that it was perpetuated. And I remember a man was killed right down from my office, working on dealing with this light rail rapid transit system. There was a constant sense of injustice and unfairness. And here's a whole document that just addressed issue after issue after issue of, a little different than now, because while there is a genocide engineering or genocide attitude, there was constant reminders of a very, very deep-hated relationship and view, and the view of the government was much different. And so I like to just say that it was raised, genocide was a concern, and the question was raised frequently about the role of government or quasi-government agencies, police agencies, and others involved in this seemingly sporadic but sophisticated murder of black men and not getting the kind of thing. And that's how we began to call on the Justice Department and others. But I'll share this document with others if they would like to after the session.
One of the things, I tend to look at things historically, and you raise a question of genocide that's going on now, and there seems to be a different mindset. And if you look at things historically, back when we were growing up, this country is one that from the first day we set our foot on the soil, up through the 60s and 70s, there was some sort of struggle that was going on in this country that forced black folk to have to stand up, stand together, put their feet down and fight to ensure not only were they protected, but those that were coming behind them have been protected. And those who had achieved something in life did not just believe that they got there on their own and kept for self. They reached out to try to help other people. The generation that we live in now does not have that. First of all, there is no struggle of any sense. This is the first generation, really, one or two generations past, where there is no struggle going on within the country. When I say struggle, I'm talking about wars. I'm talking about the Civil War. I'm talking about the Reconstruction. I'm talking about World War I. I'm talking about the Great Migration to the North. I'm talking about World War II. I'm talking about Korea. I'm talking about Vietnam. I'm talking about the Panther. I'm talking about all that stuff. That doesn't exist now. These young people that we have, this generation and perhaps the one before, think we just plopped here. It's sort of like the character in Gone with the Wind. I wasn't born, I'm just here. And as a result, there is no feeling of struggle. There's a feeling of complacency, and there's no feeling of future, the need to stick together as a people to go forward with the future. And unfortunately, in too many instances, we have too many people who have achieved, who believe they got there because of their good looks and their intelligence, that nobody else had to kick the door open, nobody else had to hold the door open, nobody else had to pull somebody in while the people in front of them kicked the door and pulled in. And so as a result, there's no reaching back. And so our young people, as they go around, and I see them every single day in the work that I do, come in, school is not important. For me, come at school, I had to go to school. It was something that was going to be my future. There is no need, there is none of that. with the family structure, the neighborhood structure, the community structure that existed then, even back during this Joseph Christopher era, doesn't exist anymore. It's everybody for themselves. And as a result, we have become a dysfunctional community, and the mindset seems to be, with too many young folk, I'm supposed to go to jail. I'm not supposed to get educated. I'm not supposed to talk a certain way because that must mean I'm something else, as opposed to words and math and science and all that other stuff originated with us as black folk. We don't get that anymore. And as a result, our kids are lost. And our future, in my opinion, unfortunately, is getting lost. And we are doing to us what they used to do to us. And as a result, as long as we continue to do it to us, they will allow it to continue. And again, I see that. I'm sure the councilman sees it, and I'm sure Charlie sees it. Some of the things that take place on the east side of Buffalo, if they were to even think about occurring in North Buffalo or in Cheektowaga or on the upper west side of the city of Buffalo, it would stop. All the resources that are necessary would be poured in there to address these problems. But as long as it's taking place on the east side of Main Street and on the west side of Eggert Road, all is well. But worse, we as a community and as a people, we see this around us, but we're not talking about it. Those who should be talking need to talk. We've got to come out of our safety zones and realize that we're all in this together. And until that happens, this genocide that you're talking about will continue, and it will continue to the point where, well, we may be here, but there's absolutely nothing that we're going to be able to do. A new form of slavery is going to take over, whether it's in the criminal justice system or a new form of slavery where we will have to work for other folks at menial jobs with menial pay because we're not going to have enough folks at the top to be able to maintain businesses and whatnot. And so it's a cycle that is taking place, and we've got to wake up. It's taking place in other cities. Other cities are waking up. Buffalo, it's like sometimes you come, there's a time warp. You hit Rochester, and all of a sudden it's a new day. There's a new mindset. You go across the river into Michigan, there's a different mindset. For some unknown reason, there's a mindset here in Buffalo that does not seem to have gone beyond 1957. We got to kick ourselves into the new century, folks. Otherwise, we're really going to be hurting.
I can speak through the lenses that I saw as growing up as a boy in Buffalo. And was born in 1973, and so the late 70s and the early 80s is when I really start to get a world view. And a lot of it came through looking at the actions of my father and his friends and watching them go to plants, and a lot of his friends not even graduating from college graduating from high school because they can just go get a job in the plant. And so they would go work at a plant this day, then maybe lose a job there, then go to another plant the next day. And so it was not a need for education at the time. I remember all of the people from Lackawanna, a lot of people from the Yemenite community actually coming over from Yemen to work in the plants and actually creating communities in Lackawanna because of the need of work was there. Then I remember the plants closing. I remember the Afrocentric movement coming to fruition in the late 80s. And when all of these events were taking place around the country, the focused violence on black people, and they responded by an Afrocentric movement. I remember one of the first books I read was Notes from the Broader File, and the other one was Jawanja Conjuncfu, who actually will be here Monday, countering the conspiracies to destroy black boys. I still got the book. It's brown and everything, but I remember, and people start reading. You had brothers reading books, people dressed like Brother Fisher's wearing today. And you started to see a culture. You start to see that in an emergency form of music and pop music, in the rap music. This is what they were talking about. This is what was coming through the boom boxes. We used to have a little boom box with one speaker and sitting on the porch. That's what we used to listen to. And then as you start to see people get stronger and communities start to get stronger, I remember my father working 3 jobs and just coming home to sleep maybe 3-4 hours and getting up and going to the next job. You had brothers driving cab. You had a whole bunch of stuff going on. Then I remember people, if Mom was, when the plants closed, mom was on social services. The person come out to see if any men was living in the house. All of these issues that were made to try to get men away from the communities. And then the only other thing that we saw was this Iran-Contra affair, that when Congress said, no, we're not voting to go to war with this Iran, with Ronald Reagan. And I remember him cutting all the social programs, Reaganism and all of them, cutting all of these social programs. And then the Congress saying, no, we're not going to war. And then them finding a way in order to get arms to Iran. And then it was allegedly through Freeway Rick Ross, transporting crack and guns back and forth over the border in order to pay for this war over in Iran to the Crips and Bloods at that time. And then I remember the influx of the crack game into the city of Buffalo. I remember my friend's mom actually doing some of the most horrific things that I can ever imagine to see somebody's mother do in a crack house. People being strung out, people doing things to each other's mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers, all behind this little piece of soap-looking type of substance. And I saw that happen go through the community like wildfire. People getting arrested for, well, first it was allowed to get its grip in the community. But then all of a sudden it started moving in other parts of the area, and then they started putting in these real tough, stringent laws for the sale of this product. Then I start seeing people go to jail. I start seeing fathers going to jail for selling crack and staying at home with their crack-addicted mother, and their mother just out leaving them by themselves, and they're typically raising themselves by themselves out there. And I saw this culture continue to manifest and start to create itself so wide that it almost became accepted that this is what our community now looks like. And then I started to see my friends whose mothers were all strung out, especially the girls, who end up looking for love, looking for support in other places, going with the crack dealers, with the dope dealers, 16, 17 years old, 1 baby, 2 babies, 3 babies, get on social service. They use this house as a stash house for the drugs. Guys come in and out. Next thing you know, I see guys who were smoking the weed, because that was a big popular drug in the 70s, lacing the marijuana with the crack. Next thing you know, they all strung out on crack. I remember the change of your music, where it went from an Afrocentric message to when Seagram started to buy investment in the recording companies. And you started to hear gin and juice, smoke this blunt, we getting high and cruising. I mean, it was always in our music, but it wasn't as so far out there. It was always an undertone. But this time it was very out in front and obvious. And then you start to see people thinking that it was cool just to get drunk and get high and do things to women and do things to your community that typically was not allowed. And since the men were in jail, a lot of the mothers that used to be somebody was strung out, was nobody there to say, yo, y'all need to chill out on this stuff. This is not what's happening. And then this was when the Walkman came in. This is what we were listening to in the headphones. Niggas with attitudes. F the police. B better have my money. I mean, and we kids listening to this. I'll never forget the first time that we had the NWA tape. We had just got it. We just thought we were so cool. We were sitting on the porch. We put it in. This time we had 2 speakers on the boombox. We put it on. My mother came storming out that house, unplugged that radio, snatched the tape, broke it in half, and said, what is this nonsense that y'all are doing? But it didn't happen, so what I would do was just go to my other friend's house, whose mother wasn't there, and we would listen to it all day long. Then 40 bowls come and everything, and so this is what happened in our community. And then so the violence soon will follow when you start to have fights against the dope games and territories and everything else. The proliferation, the easy access to guns start to come. Before it was a fight, a knife all you had to worry about. Then all of a sudden, you can go get a gun. And so all of this stuff starts to multiply and continue and manifest in our community. And this is what I saw. Remember, we were the first, my generation was the first generation that started to get bussed into outside our community. And this is what we saw. This is what happened. Yeah, I'm sorry it takes so much time, brother.
You were born in 1973?
Born in 1973.
Really?
Yes, sir.
I graduated from high school in 73, but
Yeah, most of
no, but I think what it all comes down is it's self-genocide. This has been a self-genocide. I would dare say that 22 caliber killer couldn't exist today because it's so many guns on the street nowadays. He wouldn't stand a chance. And I'm for real. I mean, the kids nowadays think that a gun is a fashion accessory. You know, that it's a must-have to be on the scene. But I think it's a form of self-genocide where the infiltration of drugs, which started with, as you said, with the Iran-Contra affair, with the infiltration of the crack into this country, which is exactly the same time period of the 22 caliber killer. And I really believe that there was a concerted effort to bring about a self-genocide in the next generation, and it worked almost flawlessly. And I hope, Brother Dobson, I hope you can give a general overview to the people who don't necessarily remember how the 22 caliber killer scenario went down.
I'm going to do that. I'm going to give an overview. Actually, I have a fact sheet here. I'm going to reference the fact sheet a little bit. And then I want to ask one more question of the panel, and then we want to open it up to all of y'all in the audience because we want to have a dialogue. Growing up in the Church of God in Christ, it's always about call and response. You know, you say something and somebody says amen. So we want to hear what you all have to say. Let me just read a little bit from the fact sheet. Because I think it's important and to give some background. If you Google Joseph Christopher, you might see one reference to the serial killer who, and I'll reference to the judge, allegedly killed 13 people in the early 1980s, and that single mention is from a little-known blog. Add serial killer to your search criteria, and a more complete picture begins to emerge, and it's actually on Wikipedia. Last year was the 30-year victim of 30-year anniversary. All of the murder victims, or the alleged murder victims, were black males, with the exception of one dark-skinned Hispanic man who would have been in New York City. Two of the victims, who were cabbies, had their hearts cut out. 3 more were stabbed but lived. And actually, if you read the accounts, not only in the book but on the internet, you'll find out that the bodies were one place and the hearts were another place. And I think one of them was on the shores of Lake Erie, if memory serves me correct. Even with the web, the internet, generations have never heard of him, unlike many of the other serial killers. Son of Sam, 6 murders. Charles Manson, 9 murders. And this is what my PR person asked. Would that be different if the victims had been white? And I want to suggest to you, of course, it would have been. He was known by law enforcement as the 22 caliber killer. There were other killers who were known by this name, but none as infamous and as wide-ranging in terms of the numbers of victims attributed. The Joseph Christopher story was actually covered. I was mentioning this to the judge in actually it's 2000 documentary of FBI Files. Some of you probably know that series. I don't know if it's on TV anymore, but if you actually type in 22 caliber killer, YouTube, you can see various segments, like a 4-segment documentary from FBI Files, which gives sort of the FBI's perspective on this, and it's quite interesting because many of the facts that you all talk about are not covered in that FBI documentary, but at least lets you know that there's been one television kind of take on that. There were a couple of survivors, but I think they recently passed away. Joseph Christopher was eventually sentenced to 60 years in prison for killing 3 black men, as the judge mentioned, in Buffalo, New York. But that was overturned in 1985 by a New York Court of Appeals due to evidence of his insanity being withheld. He was later convicted 3 months in Manhattan for the deaths of Luis Rodriguez and the wounding of Ivan Frazier, and he died in prison at the age of 37 from a rare form of male breast cancer. And again, one of the reasons I wrote the book, to be quite honest, was not only to ask the question of why, but also to instigate the kind of dialogue we're having today. My background is I got a degree in English from UB. I went on and got a master's and a PhD in English. But I'm really a fan of history, and so I wanted to write a historical fiction. One of the things I do in the book is I create a couple of fictional families, one white, one black, and they're backdropped by the serial killing. But I wanted to do this because hopefully, with the beginning of this book, I just got an email from someone in Kentucky who wants to interview me for a historical site. my hope is that some historian will pick this book up and realize that there's more story to be told, there's more investigation that needs to happen. Had I more time and more resources, I would have loved to have interviewed some of the family members of the victims to find out the effect on them, and I just didn't have the time, and I wanted to get the book to press. So there's more story to be told. I'm going to stop here and ask one more question of each of the panelists before we turn it over to you all, the community, and that question is this, and I'll mention one other thing, Judge. You mentioned the Jim Crow era, and there's a wonderful book out now by Michelle Alexander entitled The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in an Age of Colorblindness. And what Michelle Alexander does, and she's actually a law professor at Ohio State University, is she looks at the drug sentencing laws that are happening today. And she suggests that that's a new form of Jim Crow, because ultimately when someone gets sent into the penal system because of drug charges and they come back to our community, as she says, they can't vote, they can't get a job, many times they can't have a place to live. And so that person is now a second-class citizen, not unlike what happened during the Jim Crow era. And so I guess my final question for the panel would be, not only we've talked about what has changed, but what can we do to the negative, but what can we do to change things back to that era that you were talking about, that all of you were talking about, when things seem to be better in our communities? What can we do?
Well, with 1,000 organizations, Dr. Dobson, in Buffalo, 500 business in the community, particularly the African American community, with 500 businesses and 250 churches and 150 block clubs and 100 community organizations and others, but 1,000 groups in total. There's a disconnection. It was in 1928 at Bethel AME Church, 54 groups came together. They were all 54 groups of the community in its entirety, Brother Pastor. Every one of the organizations that existed in Buffalo's community, black community, came together. And they came together under a cultural kind of festival-like. And today, bringing 1,000 organizations together is nearly impossible. We are disconnected. And my point of this, and then we'll get on a little bit further, because we can do some things about it. But when is the last time that we brought these organizations together? Or if I asked you today, where's the NAACP office? Who's the president of the Upstate Medical Alliance? What about the black social workers? Where did they meet at? And what day? Or the Minority Bar Association presidency? Or AAPA, MOCA? Where's the Black Chamber at? And if you don't know where the NAACP and Black Chamber are, we're in bad shape, because you all are pretty involved. And some of you don't have to put your hand up if you don't know. I've been in places where I've asked this question of 100 people, and 95 did not know where the NAACP, less more who the president of the black social worker was, or the black engineers. So there's a serious disconnection. What happened in 1928, when everyone came together, is a challenge to do that now. And these conventions that I'm reading from the BUILD organization was beginning to show a fracturing even then. We'd had some breakups in the organizations, but still we had a sense of community. It was really important who the president of the Minority Bar Association was. Not only was it important, he or she was a major player and was consulted. So that sense of community broke down. Additionally, because whatever it took in 1928 to bring us together, we can do it again. But we've got to be purposeful. The block clubs, Board of Block Clubs, Brother Councilman, used to unite. Or how about the Black Caucus of black elected officials? I know I chaired a series of those where we had the black judges and school board members and housing authority, tenant representatives and legislators, assemblymen, and county legislators and council members. They don't meet. Now, I'm not going to blame it on them because they got very busy schedules. But getting all those people together is very challenging. But we must, and it doesn't take a crisis like this to rivet us to do it. We should do it because, Sister Sherelle, it's right to do. It's right to do. It's not okay that we jurisdiction 1, 2, and 3, and the Methodist Alliance and the Baptist Conference and the 3 Baptist conferences and I don't need to go into all of that. We have to reach back to what they had in 1928, because they had a crisis back then of survival. And today, and I mean 1980, we had to do it. And that's why the Black Leadership Forum was organized. We can do it. We can come together. And it's not enough that 1,500 young black men have been killed, mostly, almost all by black-on-black crime. That's not enough, Judge. That sense of tragedy, that 1,500 lives are gone, never to come back, is not enough. And maybe it takes the immediacy, the news sensationalism of 5 or 10 people getting slaughtered in a short period of time for us to rivet and move and pivot and organize. So, in that note, that's why the YPC, which is meeting every Friday at 118 East Utica, at the Friends of the Elderly, you're all welcome to that, or whatever the organization, but let's get us together. You block club people, get the block clubs together. You business groups, get the business together. You community organizations, come together. The agencies that are under the onslaught of budget cuts today are at risk, and I'm going to leave way to others, but they are at serious risk, and we got to get them together, and then we got to come together under a big tent, because this was enough to get us together. And I hope we don't need that again to do it, but we can. We'll find the way to do it. We'll find the way. I remember the Ku Klux Klan marching on Baylor. I said, over my dead body, and they blinked. In fact, they didn't, you know, because it might have been over my dead body. But we are glad today that we survived, and now onward. It's a great opportunity, and you challenge us to do that. We will find the way. And one last comment I'll make and conclude. In December 29th, on page 80, you talk about the December 29th through January something of a significant time, the murders continued. And right then and there, I moved to Atlanta. And when I got to Atlanta, the child murders were going on. And what struck me about Atlanta was even then there was a more cohesive community. After all, they had Dr. King. Dr. King hadn't been gone but, what, 12 years or something like that? They had Dr. King. And we, you know, but they were much more united than we were, and it struck me about that. We'll give way for questions.
Again, I'm trying to be short. I think it's a number of reasons. You talked about the organizations not being together and not knowing where they may be located. Back then, we had a strong SCLC. Back then, we had a strong Operation Push. Back then, we had a strong Build. Back then, we had a strong Urban League. Back then, we had a strong NAACP. And these organizations were strong because the community and people cared. A number of these organizations don't exist anymore. It's like we don't care anymore. The organizations that you talked about with the leadership, we did not wait for back then to go and find them. They came to find us, to find out what do we need to do to deal with Buffalo. Talk about Joseph, we are worse off now than we were with Joseph Christopher. We're talking about a person, and again, as I say, I don't think he committed all these crimes, but we're talking about a person charged with 13 crimes, and he supposedly is the person who's done that. We're talking about 2011, where 5 times that many people were killed last year in the city of Buffalo by folks who we don't know or people who look like us, and we don't care. We talk about it, we have vigils, and at the end of the vigil, everybody goes home, and you don't see them again until the next one. What are we doing in between to try to make sure that the next crime does not take place, the next homicide does not take place? We've got these organizations. We talk about the Black Bar. We talk about the social workers. We're talking about the fraternities. We talk about the sororities. I talked to somebody the other day and told them if these organizations spent half the time dealing with issues in the city of Buffalo as they spend planning their next party, we'd be better off as a community. We've got to start coming up with priorities and stop saying, okay, we're going to hang with me in mind. And this kid doesn't live next door to me, so I don't care about him. This kid doesn't go to my church, so I don't care about them. They're not in my family, I don't care. They're somebody else's problem. They are our problem because we are them and they are us. And until we get back to that mindset, here in Buffalo, these problems are going to continue to escalate. One white guy charged with supposedly killing 13 blacks, 50, 60 blacks killed a year by us. And that's the end of it. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's the way it's supposed to. That's not the way it's supposed to be. So until we start to deal with this, really start addressing these problems, Mr. Dobson's going to come back here on the 40th anniversary of Joseph Christopher's charges and ask, what are you doing in Buffalo? We may be a little bit older. Councilman Smith may continue to be a little younger, but the problems will continue to exist. This room should be full of people. This room should be full of people addressing this problem, wondering about what it is that the leadership we're talking about should be in this room. But as my grandmother used to say, Nan one is in here. That sends a bad message. I mean, well, I mean, no, I mean, out here, participating in this. I mean, well, we need to address it.
We've been looking at this idea, and we've been trying to figure out how to come up with some solutions to this. And one of the biggest things is that the elimination of the black male of prominence in our family has had disastrous results on our community. And socially, after decades of targeted removal, you listen to some young women, they think that they can have children by themselves. And I got a serious argument when I told somebody, no, you can't. They said, yes, I can. I said, well, you may be able to do it, but it'll be better if you have two parents raising the child, not just doing it by yourself. It is very difficult. And so we have to start to look at putting the brothers back in position of prominence in our families. After decades of removal, it has had disastrous results. You look at, say, how can we do this? I think that every black man in the city of Buffalo should dedicate some time to mentorship. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. When I was looking at this for as far as some time in order to spend my time to mentor, I didn't go and create a new organization. I looked for an organization that had a history of actually doing that. And I joined Brother Giston doing the Boy Scout troop. And the results that we have on those young men, you can't even compare. And then when we start to look at the graduation rate, you're talking about anywhere from 25% to 31% of black men graduating. And so we talk about 75 to 70% of black men not getting out of high school. And where are they going? They're going in the neighborhoods, they're going on the streets, uneducated. They're not going to stop reproducing. And so you may do all you can for your daughter, but if she has a child by one of these guys, it may not be the most productive environment. And I always make the fiscal argument with a lot of my white colleagues, says this is a citywide and a countywide issue, because if you don't have these people producing, they're not going to pay property taxes. They're not going to pay as much sales tax as needed. And so, and they're going to keep on taking services in order to pay for their living expenses and the living expenses for their children. So financially, you should want to see these guys do good, because this is a fiscal impact that we need to look at totally. And so Brother Fisher is correct. Organizations need to come up under, we need to organize our organizations and maybe even do a convention where we start to really set out a serious agenda in order to focus on Buffalo and the issues in Buffalo. But also, we need to spend our time, I would say at least 10 hours a month, volunteering, doing something, getting involved in the organization that is already established. Don't reinvent another organization. We got more organizations than that's needed. But join an existing organization, volunteer at least 10 hours a month. And if everybody does that, we will see a change around in our society.
I think we have to consider the economics too. I work in a profession where people ask people about, do they have a job, whatever. I know people who don't even know anybody that has a job. Seriously, I know people who think Social Security is a job. They think, you know, they get Social Security disability, that's my job. You know, I think we can't ignore that we talk about the unemployment rate in America today. In this community, I bet you among black men is easily 75%. You know, if you know a black man in this community has a job, he's doing all right. He can say what we should be doing and what we can't. But if you don't have a job, you really don't feel like a man, or you don't feel like a productive member of society. So I think it's hard until we can find a way to bring about the economics where people can put some money in their pocket and feel good about themselves. We're fighting an uphill battle.
We want to now open it up for question and from the audience, but I want to say a couple of other things. There's another book, if those of you are interested in the Atlanta child murders, there's a book by Toni Cade Bambara that actually was served as an inspiration for me. It's entitled Those Bones Are Not My Child, where she looks at the Atlanta child murders. It's about a 600-page book, but it's a fascinating book looking at those murders. And the conclusion that she comes to, Judge, of course, is that Wayne Williams didn't do it by himself, or perhaps did not do it. I also want to mention that as you talk about the leadership forum coming together at this time, there was also a $100,000 reward put together for the information or the capture of the .22 caliber killer, and that money came from all over the community of Buffalo. There was also a unity rally on the steps of City Hall where the black community, the white community, the Hispanic community all came together. And so one of the things I also hear you all saying is that not only is the black community divided, but there's also a rift between the black community and other communities, and it seemed as though this crisis, at least momentarily, brought communities together in the form of the unity rally and the reward and that sort of thing. The last thing I'll say in terms of Brother Councilman is, as I said, I've been involved with Big Brothers Big Sisters in the Nashville community for a number of years now, and it's heartbreaking when I talk with my colleagues who are bigs, and there are like 500 black boys on the waiting list, and very few mentors who look like me, who look like us, are mentoring them. As a matter of fact, the majority of the mentors for the black boys who are involved with Big Brothers Big Sisters in Nashville, Tennessee, are white men and white women, because we won't step up to the plate. So again, what you are talking about, the vacuum of leadership, is all over our country, unfortunately. But now I think we want to take some questions from the audience, comments, et cetera.